really didn't it didn't really engage the community, didn't offer succor and help as much as the Christian faith did. And what it did for me is it didn't bring me back to Christianity, but it brought me deeper into Christianity, and I claimed it for myself as opposed to having been bequeathed it by my family and my heritage. So I went to divinity school, and through my relationship with Henry Nouwen, some of you may know, Catholic priest who's written a lot of books, he introduced us to more silence and discovered that there are silent communities in America, monasteries. And I've been to many, many monasteries, part of organized silence, and I'm a fellow at Society of St. John the Evangelist in Harvard Square, which is an Episcopal monastery, and I go there regularly. My spiritual director is there. And that's been very important to me. Also had a commitment to, this was for my senior thesis of writing about attitudes toward death, to helping people um, deal with the end stage of life and the truths that emerge there. So I was a hospital chaplain for a long time, and I moved away from that partly because four men my age died of cancer during my chaplaincy at Hartford Hospital in Connecticut. And this is before the AIDS crisis. And I decided this was just too much pain to be present to. So I ended up working in congregations, always in urban congregations, trying to be different from the community that I grew up in, and was really joined and inspired by the racial diversity and the socioeconomic diversity in the congregations I served, particularly in Hackensack, New Jersey, and in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I remember one moment after the Rodney King debacle in 1991. The congregation I served in Hackensack, New Jersey was interracial, and there was a lot of tension in the congregation. And we decided to have a conversation after church one day, and more people came than normal. And at first, people were very careful with one another and sort of issuing what they had been reading about until a leader in the congregation, a woman, she was the warden of the church. She was a Jamaican woman dentist, got up and in tears uh, feared for her then 9-year-old son, that he could be pulled out of his car and beaten like Rodney King had been. And when she said that, for many white people who were in that forum, you could see that they had kind of a conversion not unlike the one I had at Amherst many years earlier. Because this is somebody they knew, this is somebody they trusted, this is a story that got beyond what they had been reading about or seeing on TV, to something with somebody who they trusted, and it moved people together. So that's been something that I've really been involved in. While there in Hackensack, New Jersey, it was in the middle of the AIDS crisis, and we had a healing service with people with AIDS. And what I learned there is that there were two groups that were working in the AIDS field, secular groups, and really they hated each other because they were seeking patients and they were seeking funding. And what I discovered is that a religious community could bring them together in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, that we could broker conversations. And then I've discovered that that's a role that the religious community can continue to play. Now I'm been retired from serving as Bishop of Newark, New Jersey for 12 years. I've been retired for almost 7 years. And while there, I developed an organization called Bishops United Against Gun Violence following the Newtown, Connecticut shooting in 2012. Been involved around that ever since. and continue to be engaged in it. And what I've learned from it, that if we're going to move the needle around the issue of gun violence, what we need to do, or what I'm discovering that is needed, is to bring gun rights people and guns violence prevention people together, and especially to hear the stories and the commitments of gun rights people who indeed want to have more restrictions and more gun safety, but are overwhelmed by the threats and the voices of the NRA and the Sports Shooting Federation. So I'm discovering that there is a way to move forward, and that interestingly, that suicide is one area where people on both sides of the issue can come together and find common ground, because everybody wants to reduce the incidence of gun suicide, and more than half of gun deaths are by suicide. Where I am in New Hampshire now, 80% of gun deaths are by suicide. In Massachusetts, which has stronger gun laws, that ratio is much less. The other thing that I have been involved in is Braver Angels, which is a movement to depolarize America, originally called Better Angels, referring to Lincoln's first inaugural address, appealing to the better angels of our nature. Another group already had that name, so instead of going to court, we renamed ourselves Braver Angels, because given the polarization that we're experiencing, we need to be braver. And it's a movement that is in all 50 states. I lead the Braver Faith component of that, and it's an initiative, a movement, not to pull one side to the other, but if we can find common ground. And Dave McNeil and Dick Tonino and I have been together for a while in a group that was equal number of reds and blues, dealing with several different issues where there was polarity, and seeing if we could find common ground. All of this sort of harkens to something that my spiritual director introduced me to a couple years ago, called the mandorla, Mandorla. It is an Italian word for almond. It's the shape that's created when two circles intersect. Think Venn diagram from sixth grade math. And initially in medieval art, the mandorla, not the halo, the mandorla was the intersection between heaven and earth. Today, I see the mandorla as the intersection between red and blue, between two opposing perspectives. And I think that is the arena to which I feel called. And I think the prophetic voice today, more and more, needs to be calling people into that space, which is a place of risk, a place of transformation, a place that you can only go into if you're open and willing to listen to the other side to see if we can find common ground. This is hard to do. It's harder to do these days because of the polarization that is intensifying on a daily, if not an hourly basis. And there's some days when I want to give all this up and just sit and look at Mount Monadnock, which is outside my window. And but I'm inspired by other people who are doing this work, many of whom are around this gallery, trying to build relationships, trying to find ways to be engaged with one another across difference. So that's where I am today, and let me stop by referring to a conversation I had recently with Jonathan Rauch, who is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and also an editor at Atlantic, who is a self-identified Jewish atheist gay man. And he is passionate about pursuing religion, particularly Christianity. And he has a new book out called Cross Purposes. And in the book, he says that Christianity is a load-bearing wall for American culture. And he's calling out the Christian church, particularly the Christian church, because the writers of the Constitution were predominantly Protestant and Christian, not that we need to become a Christian country, but the values and the commitments go hand in glove with the Constitution, and we need to shore that up and to engage it more. And that is kind of the work that I see myself doing, engaged in reconciliation. Let me stop there. And questions, comments that anybody has?
What I would ask is if you can use the raise your hand feature on the thing down at the bottom, the react or whatever, so that we don't talk all over one another if we can. Or you can use the chat to type in questions or comments that we can, I'll moderate and feed to Mark. Mark, the one question you talk about, Christianity as being the foundational wall of United States and the democracy, et cetera. Talk a little bit about Christian nationalism, because I think for many people, when you talk about someone who is Christian, there can be a slip, if you will, into, oh, you're a Christian nationalist, and I think it's important to there be a clear distinction.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. I respond to that in kind of an indirect way. Over 100 years ago, the Episcopal Church, which has been my home for the past, well, really my whole life, made a bargain with the corporate America. In 1916, when the National Cathedral was finished and people could worship there, the Episcopal Church named it the National Cathedral. Didn't ask anybody, just sort of named it the National Cathedral out of its arrogance and hubris. And it could do that for two reasons. One is the Catholic Church couldn't say that it was a national cathedral because there were all sorts of restrictions in Catholic theology as to who could participate. And no other denomination had a cathedral. So we were the National Cathedral. We also moved our headquarters to New York City, thus becoming part of the business community. And that had been the model for up until the time I got ordained, and by the time that we graduated from college. If you remember the book, The Status Seekers, by Vance Packard, if you wanted to advance yourself in the world, join the Episcopal Church. Well, those days have been gone for a long time. What's happening now is in the evangelical church, much of it, although there's division there, they've made a bargain with the Republican Party. And a lot of evangelical pastors are having a hard time because they are not as, many of them are not as fiercely committed to the Republican Party as their parishioners are. And I know some evangelical pastors who are being pushed and challenged, if not hounded, by their parishioners. You need to come down on this even harder. Christian nationalism is something that has blossomed. I refer to Matthew Taylor, who is in Baltimore at the Institute of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. He is the leading sort of expert on the New Apostolic Reformation. I've done a podcast with Matthew. He talks about Christian New Apostolic Reformation, which is a segment of all of this. And they are indicating that we're involved in spiritual warfare, and that people like me are apostates and need to be defeated. And they talk about the 7 mountains, and that Trump is at the top of 2 of those mountains, media and government. And there's education, family, I can't remember what the others are, that need to be ascended to. Part of the issue, I think, and part of me subscribes to this. The opposite of faith is not doubt. From my perspective, the opposite of faith is certainty. And there's a lot of certainty out there, particularly in right-wing Christianity. And there are moments when certainty would be very appealing. It's this and not that. And this is the right way, and that's the wrong way. And when I'm anxious and fearful, there's a part of me that wants to subscribe to that. It usually lasts about 5 minutes, but there are hordes and hordes of people who are subscribing to that, and it's being fed over and over again. So that was
Hey,
a question. Now, anybody want to tell a story, a short story about their own spiritual journey? Please, Robert.
Uh, First of all, thank you so much. It's a delight hearing you. I, I don't think we knew each other when I was at Amherst, um, largely because my reaction to the what you call the white Republican atmosphere was to spend as much time away from Amherst as possible. I spent my last year and a half in Wesleyan in Japan, but my degree's from Amherst. And actually, the story I want to tell that helped me start my uh, religious, spiritual uh, practice was, and incidentally, we may have been in Japan at the same time, though I was in Kyoto and then Tokyo. So there's just a lot of interesting
Sure.
intersections. But I remember a class that I took with, I'm pretty sure it was a Professor Robert Johnson. I think he was only there for a year or two. And he introduced people to a variety of religious traditions. And he had us visit uh, a Zendo, a Quaker meeting, a Catholic church. And maybe you can tell me what the ceremony is, but at the Catholic Church, there was a ceremony held at midnight. And uh, it was some kind of turning where everyone had a candle, and little by little, each candle was extinguished until the whole church was dark. And I believe this was to commemorate Christ's rising. Somewhere around Christmas time, whole church goes dark, and then a single flame was lit,
Wow.
and the whole congregation filed out in silence.
Hmm.
And it just,
yeah,
Tenebrae.
it's a Tenebrae,
oh,
it's a Tenebrae
Tenebrae.
service,
Yes.
and
Tenebrae. Well,
yeah,
Tenebrae.
Tenebrae, yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Wow.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll just say, since I did become a Zen teacher eventually, we have a saying, in the light there's darkness, but do not be misled by that darkness. In the darkness there's light, but don't be attached to the light.
Mm-hmm.
Light and darkness are a pair, like the foot before and the foot behind in walking.
Mm.
And I really love that. And I think it applies to interfaith, and
Yeah.
being two sides at once is so important. So
Yeah.
thank you for your work in this. And
Appreciate it. Thank you. Somebody else, a question or a comment? Yeah, Peter and then Greg. Peter, and you're muted. You're still muted. There we go.
This was great, Mark. Thank you. Um, how do you find these venues other than the Braver Angels to have these kind of conversations? I've been doing it with one very conservative friend, but realized that these conversations really have to happen, deep in community in order for change to come. So what venues are there? Or is it just a way of being you should be when you confront people of very different political or other beliefs?
Yeah. There are a number of bridge building uh, organizations and movements. Braver Angels, which started after the 2016 election, recognizing that we're deeply polarized, is perhaps the most well known. But there's One America, there's National Institute of Civil Discourse, um, There's Resetting the Table, which is in the Jewish community. That started around Israel-Palestine before the October 7th event. There's several, and actually Braver Angels is trying to convene all of as many as possible. And we have over 300 partners in our network. And all of them sort of hearken to the same kind of thing that conversations need to be based in mutual respect, a willingness to listen. Braver Angels has between 15 and 20 different workshops, modules that people can engage in, either one-on-one or in groups, all designed, most of them designed by he's now retired, but he was a chair of a family systems department at the University of Minnesota. So it's based on family therapy. And The Atlantic a couple of years ago had an article about Braver Angels and said, "Can America be healed through family therapy?"
Mm.
And because in family therapy or marital therapy, there's it's a systems process, and it requires people to listen to one another and not jump to conclusions. And those and there's more and more of that. There's the Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, and Braver Angels has worked with them some to encourage legislators to listen to one another. Actually, where I am in New Hampshire has 400 state legislators. Every 3,000 people requires a legislator. So huge, huge, and they get paid $200 a year plus mileage. Anyway, there has the Granite State group, I can't remember what it's called. There are Republicans and Democrats who have agreed to be in relationship with one another using Braver Angels principles and listening to one another, honoring one another. It's convened by two former legislators, both of whom are in Braver Angels. One is red, one is blue. The one requirement is they don't talk about current legislation. They talk about other things. So there are a lot of these things out there, and every day I hear from more and more people. How can I bring this to my congregation? How can I bring this to my community? We have lots of congregations, particularly in the South, where the congregations are divided between red and blue, and people are fearful to talk with one another because they're afraid either they'll blow up or they'll lose their relationships. Finding in a lot of Episcopal churches, which tend to lean more blue, that many people who are on the red end of things don't feel safe in sharing their feelings. And how do we create safe communities such that people can talk to one another? So thank you. Somebody want to tell a story, a brief story? Yeah, Bob Anderson, Elmo.
Surprised you called on me. Thank you. Okay. So, Mark and I have worshiped in the Church of the Boston Red Sox throughout our whole life, going back to Amherst. And in 2003, you may recall that at the seventh game against the Yankees, the Red Sox melted down. Pedro Martinez was left in the game too long. Mark and I were holding hands over the telephone, doing a prayer session for like 45 minutes to an hour that night. I should add, by the way, that the Red Sox are the ultimate Christian team, at least for the first 30 years, because but with one exception, they always put the crucifixion after the resurrection for those first 30 years until 2004. But in any case, we were on the phone that night, just holding hands, despairing, hoping, all that. Your best friends are the people that go through you with the hardest times. And for us, that was an extraordinarily hard night. Luckily, the resurrection did follow the next year. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, Mark, Red Sox are 0-0 bottom of 6.
Okay, all right, they're not hitting. Greg Lewis had his hand up earlier. Did he just, Greg, you're muted, Greg.
Sorry about that. I was just saying thanks for doing this. It is. I'll preface it with a very brief. I was the product of two atheists, and went through two separate conversions. One when I was really young and had no real sense of what was going on, but I wanted to try this church thing. And another much later when a conversion during Holy Week in an Episcopal church. I then things ran out of gas on that. I know are familiar with the progressive theologian Marcus Borg.
Yeah.
His theology sustained me for 10 years, and finally it too fell apart. And I'm now back singing in an Episcopal church because my wife, Susan Hall, 73 Smith, is there, and she's suffering from a life-threatening illness. But my heart is more Unitarian or with secular humanism. And the question I've got for you is I've also, because of the concern over Christian nationalism, looking for places to put efforts against that. And the one that I found that I think is most effective is Americans United for Separation of Church and State. I've joined that, and I'm a supporter. I also now part of the supporter of the Council for Secular Humanism. But do you, apart from very important crossing bridges, and you've already dealt with that very effectively, and that's obviously a very key component of the way you approach the issue. And I have evangelicals on several sides of family, some on mine, some on Susan's. But how do you feel about the whole issue of separation of church and state? And have you found other effective organizations dealing with that issue at a time when it's under threat?
Yeah. I certainly support the separation of church and state. And one of the things that really bothers me, and it happens in a wide array of religious expressions. I call it the breaching of the third commandment. The third commandment is, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain." I learned that as don't swear. Don't say bad words. But somebody who's really had a strong influence on me is Walter Brueggemann, a Hebrew scholar, who said that really the third commandment is don't use God to promote your own agenda. Don't say that you believe in God if you don't. And a lot of people will say, God is on my side, which I think is just an egregious breaching of the third commandment. Because the only side I think that God has ever been on is God's side. And when we say God is on my side, that becomes a really difficult thing. So, I think that Christianity, and this is what Jonathan Rauch was saying to me yesterday in this podcast that I did with him, and he has an appreciation for Christianity and has a need for Christianity not to be linked with the government, but to stand alongside it and offer morality, forgiveness, and try and imitate Jesus around nonviolence and love. And that's hard to do. I don't know if that answers your question, Greg, but I do think that they need to be separate, but they are related. I hear people say, "Oh, we're a Christian nation," it just drives me crazy. It just drives because I don't see that, I don't feel that. Thank you.
David Brown.
Yeah, Mark, this this is kind of a personal question, but so feel free not to answer it if you don't want. But I'm curious how and even whether various tenets of Christianity, belief in God, resurrection of Jesus, life everlasting, et cetera, has informed these, this array of admirable things you've been involved in and work you've done. And is your work in it different from that of non-believers who are also working in it?
Well, I certainly do on the gun stuff work with a lot of people um, who may or may not come at it from their faith. Uh, and I don't know if this responds to your question, Dave, but last summer I went to the Grand Canyon, and and if you've been there, I mean, you just see all these layers, and it gets down to the Vishnu schist, and there's something beneath it, and the they say that this what you're looking at, all these layers, goes back 3.5 billion years. And as I'm sitting there meditating, praying, I'm asking myself, well, what did God do for, 3 billion years or however long it was before any life form showed up? And what came to me, and this makes no sense in some ways, is God is now. And that's as much as I could come up with. So much of my journey in faith, Bob Rosenbaum, you'll appreciate this, is a koan, an unsolvable problem. This famous Zen koan is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Well, in Christianity, we have a bunch. The last must be first, the first must be last. If you want to save your life, you must lose it. And a koan is you just sit with it for a while and can't figure it out. And somewhere along the line, something emerges, a truth, a gift, a grace emerges. That's been my experience. There are all sorts of tenets of Christianity. Well, let me tell another story. I was recently in Istanbul, and Istanbul is the capital of the Eastern Orthodox tradition. And the Western Church and the Eastern Church broke in 1054. And it was moving in that direction. We in the Western Church see the resurrection as an individual thing. We need to grasp it on our own. In the Eastern Church, it's much more of a communal thing, that Jesus, when he came up, rose again to life, and it takes some imagination and embracing of mystery to do that. He brought everybody up. In the Western Church, we have been taught about original sin. That's not part of the Eastern Church. And they broke in 1054, and they didn't have another conversation, official conversation, until the 1960s. 900 years. We can do better than that. But it also speaks to the egocentric and notion that we have, and the desire for domination, which I think we're experiencing now with Christian nationalism wants to dominate, which I think is antithetical to the gospel, least as I receive it. So it's just conundrums everywhere. Someone else, question, comment, story. Yeah, Dave Hackett.
Quick story, talking about the absence of spirituality at Amherst. In the fall of 71, I was interested in, I didn't know what it was, but maybe it was spirituality. And I talked Don Pitkin into giving me a reading course in alternative religious communities. And Pitkin seemed to sense what my interests were. He gave me a book called Waters of Silo, Thomas Merton's story of Trappist monasticism in North America. And I was up in the top floor of Converse. I liked the study rooms there. And I read that book, and in the back of it, there was a map of all the different Trappist monasteries, and there was one right down Route 9. And being an impulsive person, I decided I was going to go to the monastery. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And so I hitched not towards Smith, but down the other way it's called Spencer, Massachusetts. And I visited this monastery, and I had quite an experience of silence and the like. And after a day or two there, I realized I had to get back to school, and I came back and I told Pitkin about it. And he not only had me over in his office hours, he had me over to lunch, he had me over to his house, and he kind of led me along the way. I mean, he wasn't a spiritual director or anything, but he kind of read my interests. That, and then the next semester, John Rattay, I started in conversation with him, and I was growing interest in Catholicism, and he was willing to do a reading course with me on the saints of the Catholic Church, particularly Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. And it was not in the classroom, it was not in his office, it was at his house. And he just would invite me over, and he would talk about it. Now, I can't say that either of them were spiritual people, but they were they were sensitive to what my interests were, and were willing to allow me to explore and to provide me with resources along those lines. So that's a bit of a counter argument to the absence of spirituality, though. That was my particular experience, and they were just good teachers, and they listened, and they understood where my interests were, and gave me things that helped feed me. Just as a postscript, after I left Amherst in the following year, I did convert to Catholicism, and I asked Rattay to come and be my Catholic representative, and he thought this was actually at Spencer at the monastery there. He thought that was a little too much for him, and so he demurred. But he was quite helpful, and so was Pitkin.
Thank you. Actually, a spiritual place for me at Amherst that was consistent and life-giving, and Greg Lewis and Ted Wright will attest to this, was with the Glee Club. And the music that we sang and where we sang it, and the passion and the energy that we have. I did my first retreat at St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer when my first year at divinity school. And I had just come back from Japan, and I asked the guest master, do any of the brothers here sit Zen? And he responds, high church or low church? Half the brothers at this Trappist monastery were either Rinzai or Soto practitioners.
Yeah.
Dick Tonino had his hand up.
Okay, unmuted. So I have three things. The first is relates to Mark. The second relates to the journey from Amherst. And the third is how it translates to today. So first of all, let me say how a blessing it is to be friends with Mark. We reconnected in the 45th Union. We became trekkers through the national park with Dave Brown. Just to tell you how intimate that is, we read Tolstoy, the chapter on religion from Anna Karenina. Mark and I did the first trek. Another trek, we did the secular religion from Harari's 21st Lessons of the 21st Century. We remarkably hike. We have an Amherst influenced curiosity, and we all do poems, best read by Dave. The second is the journey. I went to Mass every night, every weekend night in freshman year. Became involved in science, started asking questions. And with logic, I basically turned away from the God of rules, favoring the God of life. Common sense kept going forward. And as a lifelong journey, I've completely gotten away from the Catholic Church, as a large majority of my Catholic high school classmates have. And there's no interaction whatsoever with the church, even on Christmas. And how it translates today, somewhat humorous. Historically, as you know what religion does with Bob Dylan's God on Our Sides, that says something. And I'll tell you, in the NCAA tournament, the coaches or players who said their victories and everything is due to God, I kind of turned off to that, thinking, what about the other team? God doesn't like them. So I started to root for the other teams. From then on to the championship where Florida played Houston, who Houston had said God was on their side from the prior victory. So my conclusion was evidently God wasn't on their side. in the final. So that's what I have to say. A long journey away from religion. I am thankful that the Catholic Church gave me the basis, but Amherst was very big in changing that, and I'm quite comfortable today.
Thank you.
That's my journey.
Yeah. There's the acronym now is SBNR, spiritual but not religious. And more people are saying they're spiritual and they're not religious. And I lament that. Religion, the root of the word religion is religio, Latin for the narrative symbols and practices that bind people together. And that's what religion is meant to do. Of course, so all of us know and have had personal experience, presumably, of religion just setting people apart, dominating one over another, invoking hatred and fear. But I still hold to the prospect that at least the faith that I live can bring people together.
And Mark, you know, it means a lot to me to be friends with you.
Yeah,
And
likewise.
even that influences me. And I keep coming back. Thanks.
Anybody else? Comment or story? Question? Ted.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, actually,
Oh, Ted Wright
which
and
Ted? Sorry, there's two of us.
Right,
Ted Wright
go
first.
Ted Wright first.
Go for it.
I'm
Ted.
used to going last.
Hey, we'll make an exception this time.
Okay. So among other things, I was thinking of a book that my wife got me for Christmas that I don't know, Mark, you didn't mention it, so maybe I don't know if you've seen it yet or not. Francis Collins, the late, well, he's alive, but I mean, he was the head of the NIH.
Yeah.
Up through the pandemic and so forth. He is a man of faith, maybe technically an evangelical Christian, though I suspect his theology and mine are more aligned, which is, not the MAGA version. So he wrote a book. It's very personal, very readable. I wouldn't say it's the most profound book in the world, but it's very called The Road to Wisdom. It came out quite recently, like last year. And in it, Mark, he mentions a number. There's a lot of personal narrative in it, so you get to see, the man behind all the science and so forth. And he talks about experiences in and with braver angels.
Yeah.
And as you know, I've been active in the Capital Region of New York chapter.
Right.
And at the end, he openly endorses. He sees this as, necessary for the future of our common life, which is, it's becoming an oxymoron, common life, but that's, anyway, I just want to put that out there.
I've met him.
The Rauch book I've ordered from the library, but this other one is worth reading as well, and it's quite easy to read.
Yeah. No, he's really important. One of the reasons I'm committed to Braver Angels is I refer to it as the secular version of the Anglican movement. The Episcopal Church is part of the Anglican movement, started 500 years ago, and the tension between Catholicism and Protestantism. And if you ask an Episcopalian, are you Catholic or Protestant? We can answer yes. We're both, or we're neither. So we
only
live
if
in
you're
that-
high Episcopal.
Yeah, yeah. Ted Spaeth.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I'm getting a great deal of nourishment from this conversation, and I'm very, very grateful. One of the things that I'm struck by is in my own journey, a great deal of my own spiritual development was thanks to my social work with alcoholics. Alcoholics often describe themselves as people seeking God through the bottle and finding God more often than not in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things that I've done as part of my career is attended thousands of AA meetings where I was open, and I began to see more and more of myself in my clients and myself. So I stopped drinking. But what I also learned through participation in all those AA meetings was that the spirit in an AA meeting is that of there are no big I's and little U's. It's sort of the ultimate Quakerism without the weighty friends and the sense of moral superiority that some of us weighty friends can communicate to people, and that is one of our grave defects, I would say. It's often said that the problem with us, those of us who are Quakers, is that we have a tendency to be rather arrogant in our belief that we have a corner on the truth. And that's very dangerous because that loss of humility is a terrible thing. But you don't see that in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting.
Yeah.
You see humility because people have been beaten down by their own mistakes and their own problems. And the result is that, for example, politics is left at the door. One of the wisest, finest, most inspiring people I know in an AA meeting that I like to attend is a devout Trumper, but we don't talk politics. And we truly love each other. I mean, this guy is versed in all of the literature of AA, and he shares it, and he cares so deeply about other alcoholics that he's as good a quote unquote small c Christian as any I've ever known. And the result of that experience was that it's allowed me to be an ambassador to all sorts of other faiths. When I worked at the Salvation Army for 10 years, mainly as an emergency shelter director, I was an ambassador from AA, encouraging the evangelical Christians to keep an open mind to the value of attending Alcoholics Anonymous. When I worked at Episcopal Community Services, I went to the Hope Group of AA every day. When I worked at secular organizations, the Diagnostic Rehabilitation Center, Addiction Medicine and Health Advocates, once again, I was an ambassador from AA, but there with secular humanist medical doctors who had such a rigid medical model of alcoholism that they thought the only way to deal with the drug was with another drug. And I really do believe that methadone and buprenorphine and medical care are incredibly important in working with heroin addicts and other opioid-dependent people. But it's a shame. And I'll conclude with this. I forever find that the parable of the Buddhist parable of the blind man and the elephant applies to so much of what I've learned about alcoholism. That is that the medical people see it as a rope. The religious people tend to see it as a rug. The cognitive behavioral people see it as a trunk, and all too often nobody realizes it's an elephant because they don't have a holistic vision.
Right. Huh.
And in my Quaker meeting, I ran a special support group for Quakers who had a problem with alcohol or had loved ones with a problem with alcohol. And it was a very meaningful experience. There was one old Quake who stood up and said, "Well, I've never touched the stuff, and I'm sure that 2/3 of the other people in my meeting have never touched the stuff." And a wise old Quaker in my meeting said, "Well, you should have told him you were there for the other third."
Thank
So
you.
that's my contribution.
Yeah.
The
Thanks,
12-step
Ted.
fellowships can teach us a lot and are not in contradiction to the more traditional religious faiths.
Well, I remember reading an interview with Kurt Vonnegut, who said that AA is the only true religion in America, and I read that many, many years ago, and because people are up against it, it's a life or death thing, and the people that I've done spiritual direction with who are in AA, Jesus, the wisdom that they have and the courage that they bring is just amazing.
Well, Mark, a cliche.
Mark, to sound, let me cut you off, Ted, because we're
Please.
running short on time. Mark, to sound positively religious, will you close us with a few words? And then we need to bid everyone good night.
Okay. I'm going to give I guess it's a blessing from Martin Luther King. I don't know if it's a blessing. Power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice is at its best is power correcting anything that stands against love.
Nice.
Thank you, everyone, and
Thank
look
you.
for the next announcement for it. And Mark, this was wonderful.
Great.
And,
My honor. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you all.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you,
Go
Mark. Thanks,
with God.
everybody who
Thank you
joined.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
We'll be
Thank
doing something like this again in a few weeks, and hope some of you can join us again. Thank you, Mark.
Bye all.